Welcome to Hail to the Podcast, brought to you by the Maize and Blue Review. I am Trevor McCue, Senior Editor for Maize and Blue Review, joined as always by our Intel Insider and Publisher, Mr. Josh Henschke. Haven't seen you on screen in a couple of weeks. Good to be back. I know you've been entertaining the folks with some video game playing, trying to be a gamer streamer.
Yeah, trying my best. You know, I'm trying to be the next latest and greatest video game streamer. We'll see how that goes.
I remember like when that was first started to be a thing, my brother was super into it. I'm like, so you're watching other people play video games? Why wouldn't you just play it? And he made the whole argument of like, well, you watch professionals play sports because they're better at it than you or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I guess, whatever. And these dudes make multi-million dollars, right?
Yeah.
We're in the wrong business. I also suck at video games, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. But I was always the guy that got laughed at on COD when they would show the
terrible
screen. And, oh my God.
Awful.
You can't play enough to compete with the 10-year-old British kid that's swearing at you.
Yeah.
Right. So
true.
All right. We are here to talk Michigan football, not just video games. So the summer is coming to an end. Some of the big signs of summer coming to an end. Big Ten Media Days next week. We're going to jump into a preview of that. Very different world for Michigan this year. Back-to-back champions, target on their back. No more talk of this being a fluke. They are the leaders of the Big Ten. How are they going to handle those expectations moving forward? Blake Corum is going to be a big piece about Michigan's success this season. We heard from him recently in his most recent episode with the 33rd team, talking about his recovery coming back. Want to dive into some of his comments that I found very interesting. And then, of course, we are going to talk recruiting, two of Michigan's biggest targets, one for 2024, one for 2025. And then, of course, anybody watching live, we have our comment section up. Feel free. Throw in some questions. We'd love to answer them for you during the show, or just any feedback. Again, we love the conversation over there. But we're going to start with the media days, right? So like I said, 2021, Michigan was kind of defending their beat Ohio talk that was going on, right? They had the banner up in the facility about what are you doing to beat Ohio State? I think the quote was, we're going to beat Ohio State or die trying, right? And there was a lot of skepticism, of those comments. They come out and do it. 2022 is very much about the quarterback controversy, maybe a little bit of Jim Harbaugh's NFL flirtation as well, but it was kind of a prove it year again, right? Cool. We saw what you did in 2021, but Hutchinson's gone. You don't even know who your quarterback is. What are you guys going to do? That's not the case in 2023. Michigan is showing up to Big Ten Media Days, back-to-back Big Ten champions. And all expectations are they're going to be a top 4 team starting the season, and they have a national championship caliber team this year. So let's start first with who will be attending for Michigan and anything you think that means or any comments you want to make about these players. I was not shocked to see Chris Jenkins, Mike Sainristil, and Blake Corum being Michigan selections to represent at Big Ten Media Days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got pretty much an endless list of guys that you can pick to represent your program there. I mean, a guy like JJ could have been there. Mike Barrett could have been there. I mean, there's just so many guys that you could have picked and would have been like, all right, yeah, that's a good pick. And these 3 guys are, excellent representations of your program. And, a guy like Mike Sainristil, who's kind of built himself into who he is, from both sides of the ball. So, really not shocking to see those 3 guys do it. I mean, again, Harbaugh had an endless selection of guys that he could have picked. And I'm actually surprised. I am a bit surprised that he didn't pick JJ, but maybe that happens next year. But either way, it's not like, it's not a
after everything that happened last year when he sent Cade.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone deciding that meant that was the end of the quarterback competition, right? He's probably, it used to be like a senior thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like captainship in general, like that's another big thing, right? These 3 guys probably have a good chance of being captain, right?
Yep.
I'm with you. You probably could have selected another half dozen dudes, but those 3 in particular are guys that turned down the NFL, came back to Michigan, but again, you could throw Zinter, Cornelius Johnson, a lot of guys into that group as well, right? Yeah. I think of the group, Sainristil was really impressive last year, making the change as a leader. But if you've been following along with like the Michigan Made series or anything else that Michigan has been putting out, a guy that's really stuck out to me in terms of leadership has been Chris Jenkins.
Yep.
So I'm not shocked to see him there. Not shocked if he's a captain, but tell me if I'm wrong. It kind of feels like this is kind of becoming Chris Jenkins' team in some ways.
Yeah, I know Michigan. Excuse me. Michigan has some really strong leaders on defense. I mean, you can point to Mike Sainristil's speech at coming out of halftime against Ohio State that really spurred the
Great point.
defense on. Yeah, and Chris Jenkins again. I mean, he wanted to become more vocal, and he certainly is. I mean, yeah, Michigan is some really solid leaders, and just so happens that a good majority of them come on the defensive side. And I'm not saying it's an issue on offense. I'm just saying that's just how it happened. And, that's not a big deal. But yeah, again, two guys who really represent the program, who care for Michigan and want to take Michigan over that last hump, which is, now it's the semifinal talk, getting over that semifinal talk. And that was a big thing for a major motivation for all those guys who returned, Zinter, Keegan, Corum, the Sainristil, all of those guys. I mean, they were really like one of the big driving factors was to get over this hump and compete for a national championship. And, they have all the tools to do it. Everything is in place. I mean, yeah, they have some question marks, but the question marks that Michigan have, I bet 95% of the programs in this country would like to have those kind of question marks that they have. I mean,
Right.
it's just that's
You don't know who your second corner might be, and that's it. Like,
yeah, right,
right.
exactly. So it's funny how that kind of issue is just how well Michigan is set up for this year, and obviously, they got to get it done. But yeah, as far as as Chris Jenkins goes, I mean, yeah, absolutely, it's. I would not be shocked if he's a captain. I mean, Michigan could have like 6 captains this year and it'd be totally fine. So, yeah, I mean, the more leaders you have, the better. But yeah, those 3 guys are pretty much as good as it gets from a representation standpoint.
I think you're right too, as far as just the story of Michigan football, right? Like what Jim Harbaugh likes to sell about his program. Jenkins was a guy that came in as either an underrated inside interior guy, or maybe a mispositioned, overrated outside guy. He was a tweener, right? Anything you could do to knock him, right? And it's going to take 3 to 4 years for him to develop. And he was a solid contributor sooner than I think people thought. But now he is who we said he could be, and far beyond that, right? He's going to play at like 320 pounds probably, right? The guy's an absolute monster. And I think he has every chance. It's crazy to say, but to not only meet, but possibly surpass Mozzie Smith in terms of on-field production and even NFL draft pick, right? Like we've heard this a couple times now. And I've told you, if I talked to a scouting buddy and it just, this keeps coming up, that when NFL scouts were watching Mozzie's film, they kept being drawn to Jenkins, right? So he's a guy on a lot of people's radar. And if he's adding this leadership chip to that equation, I think that's going to be great for him. Like you said with Sainristil, we've seen him before fired up, and Blake Corum, again, just another guy that says and does all the right things in terms of that Michigan man, not what it's kind of become, like Michigan only hires people connected to Michigan, but like literally what Michigan wants to say they're creating when guys get through the program, right? So you touched on it though. The expectations piece.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind of trying to convince people of the talk the last couple years, and now they've got to own it, right? They've pretty much said natty or bust.
Yeah.
I do think if they won a playoff game and lost in the national championship, that would feel really bitter in the moment, but I think that's something they might be able to grapple with over time. But we saw Georgia last year after they win, and everybody's like, you said we were going to be 5-7 and nobody believed in us. Like, so corny, right? Yeah. Nobody was saying that, right?
No one said that.
Yeah. So Michigan's not trying to create the fake underdog chip, right? They're going all in on, they know what the expectations are. And that's going to be kind of the theme of the season, starting with the Big Ten Media Day. So how do you think they begin to own that? After losing 2 straight playoff games. I mean, again, you've beaten Ohio State, you've won the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. But now if you don't do it, you start getting compared to maybe Bob Stoops, Oklahoma, some of those Clemson before they got over the hump, whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean how do you own it? I mean, that's the $1 million question. I mean, they said, they mentioned basically, last year that, they were just happy to be there. That was the big thing, that they were just, happy to be there against Georgia. Happy to just be representing there, beating Ohio State, doing all that stuff. Last year against TCU, it was kind of more of a this was a missed opportunity, and everyone in the program will admit that. And now they're at the point where they're saying, okay, well, we need to. This is the next hump that they need to get over. They got over the Ohio State one, they got over the Indianapolis one. I mean, obviously, you got to get over one to get to the other, and now the expectation is to not just be happy to be there, to happy to have a seat at the table. You want to be the head of the table. And obviously that's Georgia. And, to compete and to be amongst the big boys, you got to beat the big boys. So now that's what Michigan's mission is. I mean, this year and beyond. It's not just a 1-year window here. I mean, this might be Michigan's best window to beat a team like Georgia. I mean, we don't really know what next year is going to look like. There's a lot of variables involved, but when you look at Michigan's depth chart from top to bottom, the experience, the leadership, it might not get as good as what it is right now. And so this is the window to do it. And, and these guys, I mean, these guys aren't naive. They know what this is. They know what's at stake. They're not satisfied with what happened against TCU. They're not going to be like, oh shucks, we'll get them next time. No, they wanted to win, and they're going into this season wanting to be better prepared. Not making mistakes in crucial moments, the mistakes that they didn't make all year that they made against TCU. They want to avoid that, and how they do that, I mean, that's up to them to figure out. But, again, this window is, it might shut quick right after this year, or it might be slowly closing. But, you're talking from an opportunity standpoint. The time is right now. And you never know. I mean, if they do end up, making it to the national championship game and beating Georgia, I mean, I don't know if that'll happen. Then the window probably becomes wide open again, because now you're amongst the big boys, and that changes everything, when it comes to recruiting and transfer portal and NIL, all that stuff. So, you got to have one before the other. And, I think right now, coming into this with expectations, that you're a national brand and you can compete on a national level. Now you got to go out there and prove it. Obviously one game at a time first, and you got to beat Ohio State all over again and do the whole thing. But, the opportunity might not be as good as it is right now. So you got to take advantage of it while you can. And, you can't be complacent. You can't just say, well, we're back-to-back Big Ten champs. No one can touch us. No, that's not how it works. And they've been pretty open about, not being complacent and not just being happy to be there. They want to, get that seat at the table and have a permanent place at it. So this is the year to do it. They've got all the pieces to do it. And they just got to, I mean, at this point, they just got to get it done. I mean, there's no other way to say it. They just got to get it done.
No, I think that's fair. And that's an interesting level of pressure too. Right. But yeah, no, I do think there is a window. Not that like they won't be this good again, but this feels like an era of sorts, right? 21, 22, and 23 feel like they're always going to kind of be connected. And we know Michigan's goal, along with beating Michigan State, beating Ohio State, Big Ten daddy, right, is to have the most players ever drafted in a single NFL draft. And, we already saw was it the East-West Shrine game? Yeah. Right. The amount of players, 7 Michigan offensive linemen. I mean, the amount of guys that are already being targeted by these offseason folks in terms of NFL, that we know the roster's loaded. So there's really just no more excuses. And that's part of it too. Yep. I do think they're going to be able to reload and continue this path that they've started. But what they do next year, probably, even if JJ comes back, a lot of the team is going to look really different. Right. So I do think, they kind of thought they were going to win against TCU and expected to, and kind of had a look ahead attitude or whatever it might be. They made mistakes they normally haven't made. And I think injuries cost them. And I'm not trying to make injuries an excuse. Every team deals with injuries, but Michigan was playing with, now we know Donovan Edwards didn't have just one bad hand, but one bad leg. Right? No Blake Corum. Schoonmaker gets hurt at the start of that game. So it seems like Michigan might be coming into this year looking to, I don't want to say protect guys, because you can't play scared either. Right. But you have all this depth. You got to use it to your advantage. And one of those guys you're hoping will be at full steam at the end of the year is Blake Corum. Right. Not having him last year, losing him at the tail end of what was a Heisman level campaign. Right. You go on, you beat Ohio State, you win the Big Ten without him. But man, I think especially against what TCU was doing, I think having Corum would have been a major deal. So he updated his status recently, again, on a video with the 33rd team. Josh has an article on our site with a link to that if you haven't seen it. But one of the things that stuck out to me was Blake basically said he's ready to go, that he's at 98%. And the only reason he's not at 100 is he hasn't been cleared for contact yet. He hasn't taken those first few hits, right? Yeah. We've talked about that a little bit, like that last little mental aspect of getting hit again and making cuts and trusting that. But do you think, hearing Blake say that, right, and assuming he's going to get cleared when he's cleared, which should be early into fall camp, and he's participating, do you see any lag in him kind of coming back and running? Do you think Michigan's going to play it easy with him, or is Corum going to pick up where he left off, if you will, in terms of production from last year?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think you don't really need Blake Corum these first couple of weeks. I mean, even you can make an argument into Rutgers with their Big Ten opener. So yeah, I mean, you're not gonna. I don't think they're just gonna be like, hey, we're not gonna play you. I mean, it's Blake Corum wants to play. I mean, you can't just keep Blake Corum off the field, but at the same time, you don't want to just say, all right, go have fun, ease into it. Or not ease into it and just go right in and something terrible happens. But, I think his level of, fitness and how he handles the contact, I think it'll determine a lot during camp. I mean, because these guys hit each other in camp. You're not playing two-hand touch in camp. You're actually, you're hitting each other, and you're running structured scrimmages and all that kind of stuff. So he'll get that hit stuff out of the way a little bit during camp, but I mean, there's nothing compared to real live reps in games. So do I see a scenario where Michigan kind of limits him a little bit? Yes and no. I guess it just kind of, you can go into a game with a plan, and then that plan can get totally thrown out the window in the first 5 minutes, So I'm sure there's probably a pitch count, so to speak, on Corum, and there might even be a pitch count on Donovan too, because we can't forget about him having off-season surgery too. So both guys are going to be ready. I mean, that's not a concern for either guy. It's not a concern. They'll be ready to go. But again, with the quality of Michigan's non-conference schedule, you almost don't really need them at that point. I mean, yeah, you'll play them as much as you can, but at halftime, these might not necessarily be games, and you can just sit them. But at the same time, we're talking about Blake Corum coming off a year where he probably would have won the Heisman Trophy if he was healthy, and these guys want their stats. Donovan Edwards has been very vocal about wanting to go to the NFL after this season. So, and yeah, you're not going to win the Heisman in the first 4 weeks of the season. And you're also not going to be a first round draft pick in the first 4 games of the season as well. But you want to create tape for professional teams to look at. So there's also that aspect too, where you want to give these guys the touches they deserve, but also preserve them for down the stretch, which Michigan didn't have that luxury of doing last year. So getting over that mental hurdle of taking that first contact to the knee is going to be big. And I don't think that's going to be a concern for Corum at all. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting scenario here, because I mean, unfortunately, Michigan has a lot of depth at running back too. So they can afford to get some guys out there. I mean, a Ben Hall, I could see having a lot of extra snaps, CJ Stokes, even Tavi Dunlap, could get some more carries too. So it's an interesting scenario because you've got two guys who, want to have jokingly said during the offseason that they want to split the Heisman Trophy together. So it's going to be hard to keep those kind of guys off the field who want to play. But at the same time, you also want to, have these guys available at the end of the year. So it's an interesting dynamic that we probably won't really get an answer to until, right around the season opener, because it all depends on what, fall camp looks like for these guys. But I mean, there's going to be opportunities for these guys, but we'll see. We'll see how it all develops and how these two guys can work together, because Michigan has to work on the pass game too. So who knows? Maybe that opens up an opportunity to sling it around the yard a little more. So a lot of moving parts, but it's an interesting argument to have for sure.
I do like their depth at running back better this year. I think Stokes is going to remind people why he was so hyped last year and have a good bounce back. I say bounce back. He finished with more rushing yards as a freshman, 5 yards per carry, than Corum or Edwards did when they were freshmen, right? Yeah. So he's arguably ahead of track when you go with that. But I think the thing that's got to change is just the total carries, right? So we talked about the non-conference schedule. Last year, Corum had 13, 9, and 12. Five of his 12 carries against UConn were touchdowns. Pretty impressive. But then we get into Big Ten schedule, 30, 29, 25, 28, 33, 20 against Rutgers was his lowest, 28, and then 18 in the first half against Illinois.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, for sure. So I think that's where it's got to happen. I think, and in the past we've seen it, where maybe 20s is marked, 25 in a big situation, whatever it might be. But you talked about the pitch count. I mean, if they need him to run because Edwards is hurt or whatever, but I wonder if that's just going to naturally happen from success. So if the deep ball is connecting better and they're scoring more, Edwards is healthy, is Corum maybe just naturally not going to get too many carries because of the pace of game potentially? Or are we going to see what I think was kind of frustrating in years past, where it was like the constant rotation of running backs? Remember, like guys wouldn't even they'd have one great carry and then they were off the field, right? Like, how do you think is Michigan going to manage this with their own success on the field? Or are we going to see something more deliberate in terms of rotation like that?
Yeah, I mean, during the early season, the first couple of games of the non-conference schedule, I'm sure you could probably make an argument where there's going to be more deliberate rotation, just because they can afford it. I mean, these games could be over by halftime, so that you've got you've just got.
I mean, that's the goal, right? Just blow them out of the water so you can get everybody else ready.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a very similar situation to what we saw last year where, I mean, obviously there's not a Cade versus JJ type of situation where you got to get guys snaps, but, there's going to be an opportunity for a guy like Davis Warren to come in there and get more snaps. And, Jack Tuttle will also be involved too. So then you can also change the rotation, with the running backs, as well as getting more offensive linemen in there, as well as getting more wide receivers in there. So I think it would be beneficial for Michigan to not just get rotation at the running back spot, but, get some rotation everywhere else, because, a lot of these guys are going to be gone after this year. And the more experience you can get for everyone, as much as you can, regardless of the situation, the better off these guys are going to be long-term. So, I mean, I think even outside of the running back position, I think getting a rotation and a purposeful rotation will be important. And because you're likely going to lose Corum and Edwards at the end of the year. And, you're going to have a Jordan Marshall come in who's going to come in and compete right away for snaps. But you're going to have guys who get experience too. The Ben Halls, the Cole Cabanas, the CJ Stokes, the guys that are on, in the running back room. So, I think having like a purposeful rotation in these first, 4 games, and even if they're lucky down the road during Big Ten play too, they'll have some opportunities where you can trot some guys out there in some, not necessarily key moments, but non-garbage time, meaningful snaps. So, the more experience you can give your guys, the better it's going to be long-term. And, the more that they can show that, they can handle a bigger role when their number's called.
I think the one thing that's going to be interesting to note, I kind of gave our guy Brock Heilig some crap when we were talking about impact players with Michigan, and he had Corum really far down the list because he expected him to get less carries and arguably not be the same version of himself, right? And one thing he said in that interview, Corum, that is, was he's added muscle, which is kind of hard to believe.
Yeah, right.
The guy's an absolute monster for 5'8", 5'9", or whatever. But he said he's added a little weight. It's good weight, it's muscle, and he feels faster. So if we're imagining a Blake Corum that gets comfortable with contact and gets to what he considers 100% coming out of fall camp, and we saw this with Ronnie Bell last year. Ronnie Bell said the same thing.
Yeah,
he felt stronger and faster, and he looked better last year. If Corum is better this year, whether it's breaking more tackles or whatever with strength, getting even more push off of his leg because of strength. And the last little piece that he seemed to lack was that final top end speed, right?
Yep.
Where he could get away from guys, but the full breaker, if he adds that, he might not have to play a ton because he's just putting up so many stats in that first half anyway. But yeah, a better Blake Corum is a crazy thing to try and imagine.
Right. Well, a faster Blake Corum too, because the funny part is that he could get run down. That's kind of the thing. Like, that was his major gripe, is that he didn't necessarily have that top end speed to totally break away from guys, but he was so shifty that he could find an opening and just be gone. So if you're talking about him adding speed, I mean, that's just another level that he's going to reach. And the thing is too, with Corum, is like, his knee injury wasn't because like he didn't have, the muscle or the structure around his legs or whatever. I mean, it was just an unfortunate hit that hit him in the unfortunate spot at the right time. I mean, it was a freak hit. It wasn't an overuse issue. It wasn't, a non-contact injury that you could blame as being overused, but it was just a freak hit that just unfortunately hit him at the right place at the right time to do the damage that it did. But I think you find that a lot with guys who have knee injuries. They come back stronger and better with their,
just crazy because 30 years ago your career was over, right?
Yeah, right. With their robotic cadaver knee tendon that they have in there that makes you have like kind of like rookie of the year or whatever, where he has that arm with the arm injury, he breaks his arm and he comes back and like throws fast. You get the robotic knee, and
what a reference.
Yeah, I'm going way back with that one, but you have something like that, they come back better. It's just knee injuries in certain situations aren't as bad as they used to be. Yes, you can totally shred your knee and be done, but some instances you can come back better. So I mean, and if he does come back better, boy, that's good news for Michigan. I mean, that's only positive for Michigan. So
yeah, meniscus injury a little bit easier to bounce back from than other things, and just medical advances are impressive, man. That these guys, again, don't come back the same, but arguably a little bit better, right? Yep. So real quick, we did get a question over in the chat. Again, we go live on YouTube with the Hail to the Podcast episode, so make sure you are liking and subscribing our channel so you always get notified when we go live. Got a question here from John. We were speaking of knee injuries, and he asked about, is anyone else worried about Will Johnson talking about a minor surgery to scope his knee? He says, as I once heard from an orthopedic surgeon, there is no minor knee surgery. We knew Will there was banged up a little bit camp. And again, we don't really like get into the business of talking about injuries. And then he kind of came out and said a little bit, he's a full go as far as we've heard. And I haven't heard anything to raise any concern. Yeah. I get what John is saying. You don't like going in there at all, but post spring, summer, coming into fall, have you heard anything regarding Will to even raise any concern at this point?
No, I mean, I heard during spring, and if you were a subscriber on our site, you would have known this for months, 6 months or so or whatever, but that he was a little banged up, had a minor procedure. I mean, yes, knee injuries aren't exactly minor, but relatively speaking, in the grand scope of from a total knee reconstruction to a minor scope to get to clean up, yes, it is relatively minor in the grand scheme of knee surgeries. So I think that's in terms of longevity and missing time. I think that was your best case scenario for Will. And yeah, I mean, hasn't mentioned any concern into for however he's spoken for many times. He's spoken to reporters and such, and the people I spoke to even during spring weren't concerned. And he'll be full go by full camp, and that's still our expectation. About a week and a half away from fall camp. So, I don't know if he's going to be a 100% participant. Maybe gets eased into things a little bit, but no, there's no concern for his availability for week 1 right now. And yeah, it was just basically what the extent of what happened was just a kind of a cleanup essentially. So nothing that would sideline him for a significant amount of time. So yeah, I mean, we'll see, but right now we're expecting him to be a participant in fall camp, excuse me.
And kind of like we were just talking about with medical advances and stuff, there's a lot of things that dudes used to play with for a very long time that nowadays they just go in and take care of it. Like Junior Colson's another guy that had some stuff done. Both Drake Nugent and Miles Hinton were not contributors early on because they had some stuff done. It doesn't sound great. You'd rather he has no injury, right?
Yeah,
right. But it's also not what it used to be. Derek called out. I had posted that up. Did not expect a Rookie of the Year reference on here today. Neither did I. If I knew it was coming, I would have brushed up on my Gary Busey facts. But
yeah, I didn't expect to say it myself. It just kind of came out. So
it blew my mind. It blew my mind when I realized that the kid is in American Pie. That he was
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I can't watch it the same anymore.
Oh man,
I was always an Angels in the Outfield kind of kid myself.
I did. I liked both. Angels in the Outfield was very good too. It was
Tony Danza, right?
Yeah, the whole flapping of the wings thing was kind of lame, but it was still that was a good movie.
I haven't watched either one in a while. There's no way they have stood the test of time.
I highly doubt it.
We'll do a stream on that sometime.
Yeah,
so
right.
Speaking of, little teaser, we are going to have something very, very exciting, or that we are at least excited about, to announce in the very near future regarding football coverage coming up this fall. We just recently all got together and kind of talked it out, and we are really, really excited about our plans for this fall to bring you guys the most comprehensive coverage on game day and throughout game week. So stay tuned. We will be giving you updates on that shortly. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is the same guy we talk about, I think, in every episode. It's impossible to not talk about him.
Yeah.
In an off season where Michigan football is literally a national championship contender and everything we just spoke about, I don't think you or I can go a whole day without anybody asking about Bryce Underwood. Right. So 5-star number 1 QB in the 2025 class recently set what we're going to call a tentative commitment date. I don't think anyone would be shocked at this point if the commitment comes sooner than that, but he's talking about in January doing a commitment. There is still a lot of talk, and Josh, you can get into it, about Michigan's barbecue, the barbecue at the Big House, big recruiting event next weekend. We will talk about that on next week's podcast, whether or not he's going to attend. But just kind of in general, I know you posted some intel since the last time we've had a podcast about where things would sit with Underwood in Michigan, and I'm going to let you give a lot more detail, but long story short, things continue to be good for Bryce Underwood in Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking, it's funny just how few short months ago, you and I were sitting here going, we'll see what happens. I'll believe it when I see it.
Right.
And now I'm believing it, and now I'm seeing it. I think
we're looking into people talking about him being a silent, like that's the level of the chatter this has become, right?
Right. And we're not
you and I, Kirk Campbell.
Yeah, right. And you and I aren't saying he's a silent. We'll make that clear. I mean, he's
but that's the kind of smoke we're talking about.
Yeah, no, there is some chatter out there, but I don't think that's accurate. But
no, Josh, don't tell me he committed to Michigan. Tell me he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, yeah, just to clarify, we're not saying that. I'm just saying, like you said, the scope of things. Like, we've gone from hedging to the point where like, hey, I don't know if he's going to stick around home. I think he's going to want to stretch his legs, to now telling people, I don't think he's silent. No.
Yeah, right. What a difference a couple of months make. No, I do think, yeah, obviously not a silent, but I do think Michigan is right at the top, if not the leader right now for him. I truly believe that. I've heard confidence from multiple people out, and different. They're different people. They're not. It's not an echo chamber. It's different place sources who have confidence that Michigan is in a really, really good spot for Bryce Underwood. And I believe it. I truly do. I think if Michigan continues to do what it's doing and win, obviously, and with Kirk Campbell continuing to do what he's doing in terms of building that relationship with Bryce and his family, I think Michigan can win this one. And and it's not going to be easy. We're not talking about them just walking it out and just walking away with it. It's not. It's going to be a battle. But I think if Michigan continues to do what it does, present a good NIL package, in terms of what he can do with it once he arrives on campus. I'm not saying, offering him a bag. I'm just saying like having like that presentation of what he's capable of doing while at Michigan and showcasing that and just all of the above. I think Michigan can really can land him. And yeah, we'll see if that January 6th commitment date is firm. He kind of said it was a little bit tentative, so it could even come before that or after that. But yeah, there's no denying how well Michigan sits right now, and I'm not in the territory of making an official prediction and placing a future cast and all that kind of stuff. I'm not at that level yet, but I do get the sense that Michigan has been told that they're sitting in a really good spot right now, and I'll stress right now. I think, yeah, I mean, this will be the Michigan's biggest commit, in a very long time, maybe ever. I think Bryce
getting someone like Rashawn Gary, but at the quarterback position.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, very true,
Yeah.
very true. I think that would be a huge win. You're talking from one 5-star to another. I mean, to build up that kind of depth and pipeline, it's gigantic. So I'm talking right now. I think Michigan is in a really good position to keep him in the state, and we'll see how things develop. I don't know if he's going to be at the barbecue. I know Michigan has invited him and a couple of his Belleville teammates. Again, I've heard so many things like, oh, I don't know. Well, he might. I mean, we'll find out. I mean, obviously it's in his backyard, so he can show up whenever. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see kind of how that works out. And again, if he doesn't come, it's not the end of the world. But
right.
Anytime you can get a guy to visit on campus, the amount of time, especially the amount of times he's been on campus, that would be a pretty big deal. So, yeah, right now, I really, really like where Michigan sits. I would argue they probably are the top school right now. If not right there with, the LSUs, the Alabamas of the world. So, yeah. We'll see. We'll see, but it's really hard to not like where Michigan sits right now.
Yeah, and we've talked about 100 times how Kirk Campbell has changed this recruitment, right? Because it felt like he was somebody that was going to want to go to an LSU or a Bama to, get south somewhere else, and then somewhere where he can really pad some pass stats, right? So I do think winning is so important. I know everybody that the NIL conversation, I know that's there, but if you don't think winning is like the NIL switch doesn't just go on or off for these programs that see spikes or falls, right? They either win or they lose, right? That's such a big piece of it. And getting back to the playoff 2 years in a row now, that's a big piece of it. And if they do throw the ball a little bit more and let JJ be a little bit more creative, I don't think that's going to hurt when it comes to Bryce Underwood. And I'd expect you know, I talked about this. I wouldn't be shocked if he's at a lot of games this year. It'd just be so easy for him to drop in. So it's weird. It feels a little bit different than the Jaden Davis recruitment in that we felt like Michigan had a big lead this time last year with Davis, but obviously there was some trepidation, a little bit of holding back, right? Some time they wanted to give it. We found out a lot of that had to deal with Matt Weiss, right?
Yeah.
But Michigan also didn't really have a lot of targets left, right, as the season went on with Moore and Carr. So it kind of had all of its eggs in the Davis basket. So John brought up a good point. I wanted to talk about this as well in terms of the timeline.
Yep.
Underwood's not the only top quarterback Michigan's in on, right? I do think he's the clear top target, but they're in on a lot of guys, including Ryan Montgomery, who might not be looking at Michigan the same anymore after Ohio State took a commitment from Tavian St. Clair, right? So John asked, how does the positive outlook with Underwood affect the Ryan Montgomery recruitment? He seems really interested, and I believe that he's supposed to attend the barbecue.
Yeah, he is.
Right. So would he be available if Bryce leaves? So I'm assuming if Michigan doesn't get Bryce, can they go to Montgomery? This is where the timeline gets interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if he hasn't committed anywhere, I mean, he's available. I think, again, he has a really strong relationship with Kurt Campbell. Michigan believes he's on the same similar level talent wise as Bryce Underwood, so they're not feeling like they're settling. I mean, you're talking about a fringe 5-star recruit in Montgomery. I mean, this kid is good. I think obviously Michigan's board is kind of shuffled a little bit. I think Montgomery was higher up on the board than Bryce was, right around when Campbell was hired. And obviously things have shifted massively. So I do think
there's George McIntyre too.
Yeah, there is George McIntyre, but I think I do believe he's interested, but I would not be shocked
if he south.
Stay south. Yeah. But with Montgomery, this, I hate to say that like he's a backup plan because he's not, but at the same time, Michigan has clearly prioritized Underwood, that they would wait. I would be pretty certain that they would wait for a decision from Underwood first before they would see what Montgomery does. And it kind of depends on what Montgomery does too. I mean, from talking to him and his dad, it just doesn't seem like they're in a rush, which works in Michigan's favor too, because it looks like, at least from, reading tea leaves and talking to Bryce as well, that he's looking to wrap this up and he's kind of over the whole process. So that works in Michigan's favor in a variety of ways. If you land Bryce, all right, that's good. You're done with quarterback in 25. If you don't land Bryce, you can kind of still keep your ducks in a row, so to speak. You don't necessarily have to scramble to, cast a wider net with other recruits. You still got a guy like Montgomery who's there and is very interested in Michigan in the same time. So I don't think this really impacts each other a whole lot. I mean, Montgomery's not dumb. He knows, and the credit to Kurt Campbell too. He's been very open to every quarterback recruit that, hey, this is, who we're recruiting, who we're recruiting. This is, what the landscape looks like. And, this is who we're dealing with. So, I mean, I don't think either guy impacts each other. I mean, I think it's whoever comes off the board first will help Michigan either way. Yeah. Ideally, you'd like Underwood to come off the board first, just so you know where you stand. But at the same time, Montgomery isn't a slouch. This isn't a guy where you're like, well, I guess I'll take this guy. No, you'd be very happy to take either guy. You're not going to get both, but you're going to get either guy at this point. I mean, I do think Michigan's best relationships are with Underwood and Montgomery, and obviously that Michigan connection, and when he's an Ohio kid, helps with vicinity too. Ultimately we'll see. I mean, him going to the barbecue again is a good thing. If Bryce ends up being there, it's a good thing. It's not going to be weird. It's just, ideally from, a pecking order standpoint, you'd like to see Underwood off the board first. And as far as we know right now, it's certainly trending in that direction. So, we'll see what happens comes November. I mean, there's still plenty of time between now and or excuse me, I said November. Between now and January, there's plenty of time between now and January and to figure things out. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but I don't think that, Ryan Montgomery is some, consolation prize if they miss out on Underwood, and the fact that they can recruit Underwood at the same time and still be in a good standing for Montgomery kind of just speaks to, the strength of Kirk Campbell's recruiting abilities and him being open and not, hiding anything from these kids too. So we'll see. We'll see.
And I think having Jaden Davis in the fold makes all of this easier too. There's a lot less desperation here, right? Yeah. I know I don't even want to get into it because we've had our conversations about Jaden Davis in the past and some of the lowering ranking things and conversations around him that have occurred this summer. We'll wait till he starts playing football in the fall. And we'll see how the conversations around Davis start to swing again. That's all I'll say for now. I do think too. I want to talk to Nick's point. We kind of talked about again the on the field results, the winning, and how the offense looks. He says I think the Michigan passing game will take a significant step forward, which will help with Bryce. Having Sharon Moore as the sole OC should really reduce the red zone stallouts. There's an interesting part of this that I don't think people are considering, and that is John Jansen talked about this a little bit when he was with Dennis recently on our afternoon live podcast that airs at 1:00 every day, that Moore's probably going to stay on the field.
Yeah.
Right. That's where he's most comfortable. He's still the offensive line coach. And yes, he's the sole OC, but if you know anything about Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, you know that there's run game coordinator, right? And although we don't have a title for pass game coordinator right now, I think Kirk Campbell, with his previous OC experience, is going to be up in the booth and being a major help to Sharon Moore this year, right? Yeah. And that's going to be an interesting impact on the passing game as well. Now, I've kind of been in the camp of if Michigan did the exact same thing they did last year, but JJ literally just executes better after having a whole healthy offseason and being the starter this whole time, you're going to think the passing game is completely opened up because now he's connecting on deep balls that he wasn't last year. They're not running it as much because they're getting passing stats, etc. So just better execution alone is going to make it look like Michigan's running a more balanced pass balanced offense. But I am interested to see more by himself and Campbell. We've already seen his recruiting chops, and we know he was a big help to the offense as an analyst. And I know he's not called passing game coordinator right now, but I do think he's going to have a huge impact on the passing game this year. I hope that means throwing some slants occasionally. So
and not to mention too, I mean, he has offensive coordinator experience.
Right.
And it's with Old Dominion. I mean, it's not at the level of a Big Ten, but I mean, having that kind of experience calling plays and that kind of stuff helps a ton too. I mean, he can add another perspective that Michigan might not have had last year with Matt Weiss or whatever. So, I mean, it's all a positive. And, the Michigan coaching staff has been open about them being collaborative and anyone
always have been.
Yeah. Yep. If anyone needs to be collaborative, it's Sharon too, because he's got his offensive line responsibilities that he's working on as well. So, the more perspectives and opinions and experience that you can add to a guy that, we'll call him a first year OC. I mean, obviously last year he was sharing responsibilities, but this is his show now. And, he's not a guy that doesn't take outside opinions and things like that. I mean, he's open to, having a collective, brain trust, if you will. All of that stuff is going to be helpful. The perspective from Campbell in the booth is going to be huge. He's going to have some really good analysts with him and some GAs and and other guys that can help as well. So all of that bodes well for Michigan's offense this year. And we'll see. We'll see if that leads to a more dynamic passing offense or if things are going to be more of the same. And, if they are more of the same, last year was still a pretty good year despite, how it ended. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I think the biggest difference, it's not necessarily that the offense doesn't do this. I just think the defense in this resurgence the last 2 years has really focused on this. And I think the offense can do a better job of that. And it's just utilizing the strengths of the players that you have. Right. And we started to see it a little bit towards the end last year. I think they were trying to ease JJ in a little bit. And he was doing a lot of the same things Cade was earlier on. Right. And they're not the same player. And we've heard this offseason about getting Donovan Edwards involved in and Corum involved in the passing game, or letting JJ be a little bit more creative, right? That's just taking advantage of the skill set, right? So that's another sales pitch too, where you can go to Bryce and be like, look, you're not JJ, right? You're a different quarterback, and we're going to adjust to you. Like, there's things we're going to take advantage of and things you're going to be able to showcase, just like they do on defense. People always ask, oh, how did they replace Hutch and Ajabo? Well, they leaned into Hutch and Ajabo because that's where their strength was, and that changed a little bit in the coming year, right? Yeah. So I think that's all going to be part of the equation. So we'll see how it goes. Last player we want to talk about, we talked about 25 recruit. Now we're going to talk about a 2024, arguably 2026 recruit, right? Wide receiver Gatlin Bair. His recruitment is coming to an end shortly here. You've been kind of on top of this for a while, that a lot of folks thought Nebraska was the threat. And you've said this is a 2-team race between Michigan and Boise State for a while here. It's Michigan that gives him, we've talked about 100 times, everything they have to offer with, the connection with Loveland, being able to speak to Idaho. Obviously Andrew Gentry, who can speak to the missionary trip that he's going to be taking for 2 years. That's why we say 26 recruit. And then the sports medicine pieces. So he's checking out Boise State one more time. It's a guy that's arguably potentially going to be a 5-star by the end of this recruitment session. So where do you feel Michigan is today? I know we've talked about it a little bit, but how does Michigan feel about Gatlin Bair with his commitment on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, not much has really changed from Michigan's perspective in terms of feeling good about it. They walked away feeling really, really good about where they stood after his official visit. What was it, in June? Yeah, I mean, from talking to those around Gatlin, it's a 2-team race between Michigan and Boise State. And I know that people would look at Michigan and Boise State and go, well, why is Boise State an issue? Why the 2 teams don't even compare. But, we're talking from a team basically in his backyard, and the whole time we've kind of felt the proximity to home is a factor. And again, I know he's taking a mission trip, a 2-year mission trip. He's not going to be at home. He's going to be in a different country. Distance is all kinds of factors. I get it. I'm not the kid. I can't speak for the kid. I can't tell him. You can't make him feel how you want him to feel. If he wants to stay close to home, he can stay close to home. That's fine. If he ends up going to Boise State, okay, that's fine. I mean, he'll do very well there. But yeah, that's just the state of things. I think the pull to home, it would be the ultimate factor that would win out in Boise State's favor. I mean, if you look at a checklist, Michigan checks every single box that he is looking for. And I know that the strength and conditioning program, the nutritional program was a huge factor for him in his recruitment. And they really did a really good job of selling that to him and mom and dad too. I know mom and dad walked away as really big fans of the Michigan program and Jim Harbaugh. So that was just another feeling of being confident about the whole thing. So, when August 5th rolls around, when he makes his announcement, we'll see how it goes, because he's coming off a 2-day unofficial to Boise State on the 27th and 28th. And, we'll see how that changes things, in the days leading up after that to the announcement. But from a checkbox standpoint, from everything that Michigan offers, you have to like where Michigan sits. I predicted that he would go to Michigan after his official visit, and I still stand by that until I hear something different. And the only reason why I believe he would pick Boise State, is because of that home factor. And again, I understand
You and I aren't exactly experts, but they do have a decent track program as well, I've been told.
Right.
So.
Right. And I understand the whole mission trip thing, the 2-year mission trip thing, and he's going to be in a different country. And it's a legit argument to make. But again, I'm just telling what I've been told. I mean, this is a kid, and if he wants to stay close to home after he comes back from a mission trip, so be it. And 2 years is a long time. I mean, he could end up like an Andrew Gentry who just doesn't enroll. And that part of Andrew Gentry too was that, Virginia changed coaching staffs too at that time. So that kind of helped. But, if the kid wants to stay close to home, he wants to stay close to home. You can't blame the kid. I mean, you can't make him feel how you think he should feel. It's, this is something that he wants to do. And if he picks Boise State, good on him. He's close to home. He's going to do great there. And just as he's going to do just as well as he would at Michigan. But I think, when you look at a checkbox standpoint, Michigan provides everything that he's looking for. After speaking to those close to him, he's the understanding is that things are very, very close right now, and they could see a scenario where it could go either way, to Michigan or to Boise. So we'll see. We'll see how that a 2-day unofficial goes for him to Boise State, and we'll kind of get a better feel and reassess once that happens. But right now, I think he ends up at Michigan. I don't know, and I'm not saying he will. I think he ends up at Michigan. And obviously my opinion could change, and I'm open to accepting that fact. But yeah, I mean, Michigan has felt really good about it. And there's no denying the type of game-changing athleticism that he would bring 2 years down the line.
His speed is ridiculous.
Yeah, so it would change, it would change a lot of things for Michigan. And yeah, I mean, it would be a big time land. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, we don't have to wait too long, fortunately. I mean, we're talking about 4 or 5 days from now, we'll be taking this unofficial visit to Boise. So yeah, we won't be waiting very long to kind of get a closure on this.
He's just one of those really cool and great kids you want to be able to watch his story grow too. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to come in Olympic level track star, right? Come in, play football at Michigan, might be, who knows what the ceiling is for him as a football player, right? Who knows what the ceiling is Olympic wise. And then what he could do off the field with, his passion with medical stuff as well. Like, he just strikes me as a guy that if he came to Michigan, it would be just really interesting to watch his story and his time here. And he's going to be one of those guys that, 20 years down the road where we're still talking about him doing something incredible. Right.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I understand why he's being pulled one way or the other. I think Michigan's made the absolute best pitch they could. They're positioned in a better way than most schools are to be able to offer a unique talent and unique person like Gatlin Bair. So yeah, we continue to feel confident he'll end up at Michigan. And if that changes, you can keep along and follow along with us over at michigan.rivals.com. Any intel updates, Josh will have them over there. And then obviously we'll continue to talk about it on this podcast every Sunday at 6 o'clock. Hail to the podcast with myself and Josh Henschke. We will meet again next weekend to talk Big Ten Media Days and then kind of get a prep going for fall camp. And then the season's right around the corner. And like I said, we have a lot of exciting things to share with you guys in terms of coverage. If you're not subscribed already, now is going to be the time. Things are about to pick up like crazy. So again, michigan.rivals.com/sign up. We'd love to have you be a member of our community. Join us on the Den, take part in the conversations, and access again to Josh's intel. Other than that, though, we will see you next week, again, live Sunday at 6 on YouTube with Hail to the Podcast.